All right. And just, I see a question here already popping up. Everybody is muted. There's a lot of people on this call, so we have muted all the lines, but we do encourage you to engage with the team throughout the webinar through the Q&A at the bottom of your screens, and we can address any questions at the end. And if for some reason we can't get to something, we can follow up. So please leverage the Q&A chat because we do have everyone muted given the amount of people on this webcast. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our August Shell UiPath webinar, Maximizing Cybersecurity Capabilities Through Robotic Process Automation. Just to reiterate one more time on the housekeeping note, if you do have questions throughout, we highly encourage using the Q&A chat, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. My name is Mike Thorpe, and I'm the host and VP of Sales at August Shell. I have two great speakers with me today that I'd like to introduce. From the UiPath side, Jim Walker, UiPath's federal CTO, will be speaking first. Jim joined UiPath from NASA, where he was most recently the Shared Services Portfolio Manager. Before diving into the cyber portion of our presentation, Jim is going to provide some information on UiPath and how they have become a market leader in the federal space for robotic process automation. Our second speaker is Swagat Das, Senior Consulting Engineer at August Shell. Swagat joined August Shell in January after spending 7 years at the Office of Personnel Management, where he was the branch chief of the Security Operations Center. Swagat will touch on his experience managing a government SOC and how RPA can play a pivotal role within security for any organization. Lastly, a little on August Shell before we hand things over to Jim. August Shell is a public sector focused company, both owned and operated by military veterans. We are a UiPath Premier Partner and have UiPath certified engineers on staff. Two of the main focus areas for August Shell are automation and cybersecurity. August Shell provides cleared engineering talent, working with cyber teams throughout public sector and providing subject matter expert engineering for technologies such as Splunk, Red Hat, FireEye, F5, and of course UiPath. We are also a SOUP and GSA contract holder where you're able to purchase UiPath solutions. With that, I'll hand it over to Jim.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be here today. You know, when you talk about security, you're going to talk about the security of the product, and you have to talk about cybersecurity at the same time. UiPath has been in the federal space now for just a little over 2 years and about 4 months. In that time, we have grown, quite frankly, exponentially in the federal market. We are seeing agencies like USDA yesterday publish their new RPA website, displaying their ROI for all of their bots and their automations, and all of that is UiPath run. You've got Air Force just wrapped up a 125-person hackathon at 23 Air Force bases, all using UiPath robots. One administration just bought 3,500 bots yesterday to make sure all of their field agents had a bot for themselves so that they could begin automating. When you do that, you've got security risks, both internal and external. And so we, of course, very excited, 2,500 people globally, headquartered in New York, 48 people in the DC area that are available to do everything from pre-sales to help you understand RPA to post-sales, what we call customer success managers and TAMs that help you. And we really think we're a category leader, and I'll tell you why that's important. Next slide, please. So you have a lot of questions when it comes to the value of RPA, and I would say you really want to ask, what's the value of a secure bot, right? And so what am I going to get out of this? Am I going to save money? Well, in some agencies, saving money is not the prime thing that they want to do, right? They're a shared services organization someplace, and they want to increase their capacity. They want to be able to handle more external government clients so that they can lower their overall cost of business and provide a service that competes, if you will, with public sector. NASA Shared Services did that exact same thing for our 10 centers, where we really strove to keep the prices down, and robotics was the way to do that. You also want to kind of comply with the OMB Memorandum 1823 that asked agencies to look at RPA specifically in order to move people from low-value work, which I'm not a fan of that term, to high-value work, which I am a fan of. And by that, I mean If you're a clerk someplace in an office that is still heavily based on paper, it's not your fault that that paper has to be in process, scanned, digitized, and all of that data has to be copied and pasted someplace before you move to the next form. That's low value work, but I think it's more important to call it necessary work. And you want to be able to do that necessary work with someone other than a person these days, but you want to be able to do it securely. Compliance is another great secure reason. You want to be able to not only process efforts, but you want to process them with a bot that has its own credentials, so that when an auditor comes in and audits your process, you can tell when Mary and Mike do work and when Martin, the robot, does work. And you want to be comfortable that there's no difference between those from an audit perspective, other than you'll say that Martin sure does a lot of work in a hurry and Mary and Mark do it at what you would consider normal speed. So all of these are values that you get out of robotics, and we're seeing that in 78 agencies today, that they're all getting that, to the point where agencies are putting an effort out there to save $1.4 million, and they save $8 million in their first 6 months, and they say, well, my goodness, we need more of this. You have agencies that are asking for an amount of money like $900,000 for an RPA program, and they're raising their hand saying that it's going to save them over $50 million. But again, you want to do this securely. Next slide, please. So we believe that because of the way that people, when I said earlier, market leader, the reason why that is valuable to you is that people who are using different RPA vendors are migrating towards the RPA platform because of its security built in. When we have a government user group called GovPath that requires you to have a .mil or a .gov email address, and early on they were saying things about how the platform could be improved and what security it needed, and we entered those into our system and had our engineers start to look at, can we build that into our system, and a lot of that gets built in. And the Gartner, G2 Crowd, and IT Central, these are three independent global organizations, 4.6 out of 5 on 2 of them, 9 out of 10 on another. And what I really like about it is that small print that says there are 1,419 people that did the Gartner Peer Insight review. I will tell you that it would take 2 of our competitors to have that many reviews. So there's a level of enthusiasm for our software because our clients around the globe go in and say it's a good product. And by extension of that, I don't think in today's age that anyone would say it's a good product, but it's not secure. And then, of course, Gartner and Forrester have both ranked UiPath at the top of the leaderboards. We've placed first in both Gartner and Forrester last year, and you can see what the new one does for Gartner this year with the top of the box right up there with competitors. Next slide, please. Equally as important in the DC area to you is third-party associations, FedScoop, Fed 100, Service to Citizens, Government Computer News, Digit IT. They have all awarded government employee RPA programs because of the innovation and creativity that they have been bringing to the government. And again, it has to be secure to be bringing it to the government, because if the press was all about the bots are going crazy and doing their own thing, bots have been hacked, you would not see them getting awards. You wouldn't see people encouraging other people to use them. UiPath is the most awarded RPA vendor in the federal space. Next slide. And then finally, it's these 79 agencies. Right? And these 79 agencies are like any of you that are in the government online or any of you that deal with government. They have got to have either a secure ATO that's been completed, or they've got to fill out their paperwork for their security boundaries so they can add a product in. Every single one of them are doing this. So I haven't run into anyone yet that has said, I'm going to use reciprocity and just accept somebody else's ATO. Because it's a new and emerging technology, every CIO wants to take a second to evaluate the security worthiness of any new COTS products that are coming online, especially emerging technologies. All 79 agencies have done these, have given them an ATO or brought them into their security boundary, and said, we accept this, the feasibility of this software for our network. Next slide, please. These are some of the agencies of the 79, right? And those of you that work in government, you can appreciate that these are not small agencies. These are not easy to get new software into, but agencies who have done a good, solid pilot program, who have done their security testing with their CISO, who have done user acceptance testing with their users, have all found the bots to be acceptable. The nice thing about RPA, especially if you're not used to RPA versus hearing about other AI and that, there's no ethics around RPA. RPA manages and emulates people doing a process, rules-based, repetitive, boring, tedious process. So there's no really point in there where a bot could say, well, I don't know what they want me to do, so I'm just going to do something. I'm not going to slant my decision to something based on some data. You program in the yeses or their nos, right? And you give the bot a decision. Am I going to run this bot as an independent bot on a server, a virtual machine in the data center with its own credentials? I'm going to derive credentials from a CAC or a PIV card and put it in a secure vault on the UiPath orchestrator. And every time that bot runs, the first thing it does is it goes and gets its credentials and validates who it is. Or am I going to use an attended bot where the bot is on my personal laptop and I personally am going to tell my bot, my digital intern, use my credentials and go do this work. And from an auditor's perspective, I see that Jim Walker did a lot of work in a hurry using his credentials on a system that he was authorized to get into. And there's no mechanism in place for the bot to decide it's going to go to a system that I'm not even authorized to and ask for permissions. And the next slide, please. And finally, RPA is just a stepping stone to the new revolution, if you will, the new automation era, where we're going to have natural language processing and machine learning and natural language processing, text speech, and artificial intelligence, chatbots, and what is the next 2 or 3 digital labor activities that are going to be out there, right? And all of those need to be interacted with in a secure and timely manner. And you want to be able to do that knowing that your foundation, if you agree with Gartner that hyperautomation is the term, Gartner puts RPA in the middle of all of this new digital technology and has RPA orchestrate the data going into and out of these particular things in order to make the workflow smooth and secure. Next slide, please. So at UiPath, we tell all of these other technologies, we are secure. We're built on secure. We're complying with security regulations. And we really were happy to see the 1917 memorandum that's on your screen come out that told agencies you must determine how you're going to give non-person entities, i.e. bots, and they called out robotic process automation, its own credentials. Right? When we first started this a little over 3 years ago, NASA put a CAC PIV card on their bot, but there were other agencies that were just using passwords. There is no, in my opinion, no reason to step backwards in a security model and use a login and password for a bot when you can use, as Defense Logistics Agency does, a hardware security module from Thales or CyberArk, or you could use the derived credentials off a CAC or a PIV card, as you're seeing at NASA and a lot of other agencies now. But that's just the first part of it. You know, now that I know, just like my users have a CAC card and they securely log in with their credentials, you know that our attended and unattended bots are using those. We also have this entire area of cybersecurity that has to be addressed. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to Swaggart. Based on our rehearsals and that, he's got some extremely interesting information for you from real world experiences. So Swaggart, you want to take it from here?
Sure, thanks, Jim. And good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Pleasure to talk to you all. With that being said, I'll just go right into my portion of the presentation. So as you can see here with cyber robotics operations, there's a lot of different use cases here. And I think that speaks to how versatile UiPath is. You can basically tell it to do anything. If you see it on your screen, the tool is able to, if you have somebody that knows how to use the tool, they're able to make sense of what you're seeing on the screen or any kind of input or data, and then apply it to a various use case. So in my case, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience at OPM and some of the things that I experienced within our SOC and how I believe that UiPath could have been useful. And so with that being said, we can go on to the next slide and I'll just get right into it. So one of the first problems that I saw in my time was with resources being tied up in repetitive tasks, right? So cyber organizations will have different people, different skill sets, different experience levels, and that's just the nature of the game, right? And in order to ensure a certain level of performance to meet the requirements of your organization, you will deploy things like standard operating procedures or run books. And it's through the use of these that you can ensure that your resource can perform critical tasks almost from day one. And you can ensure that you're minimizing the gap in production from, say, a senior analyst to a junior analyst. The thing about runbooks or SOPs are they're highly repetitive, right? So you may have 30 or 40 different runbooks for different scenarios, and each one of those runbooks may have 20, 30 different tasks within them. So you can see how that could be highly repetitive, highly time consuming. And so what happens is when you do employ runbooks and SOPs, you can often hinder your analysts or engineers from learning and growing in their role. So a junior analyst never really gains the skill set as an analyst perspective. They just really get good at executing runbooks and SOPs. So move over to the next task or next slide. So how can UiPath help with repetitive cyber tasks? The use of RPA can empower your cyber professionals to focus on critical cyber issues, like I said. Instead of being bogged down with following a runbook or SOP, they can actually look at the dashboards, look at correlating that data across different tool sets, coming up with their hypothesis of what's going on, and then really working together as a team to sharpen their skills as an analyst. So again, the critical steps conducted by the robot will be executed in a much more time-efficient manner than human. As I said, there is maybe 40 different SOPs, and each one of those SOPs may have 30 different tasks. Well, each one of an analyst executing one of those SOPs, that could take hours, whereas a robot could do that in a fraction of the time. And this, in turn, will just make your cyber posture that much better because you're more efficient in what you're doing. And another component to it is it's being done at a much more accurate level. So many of these runbooks and SOPs in the cyber world, they'll require or they'll entail taking cyber intelligence, such as IP addresses or domains, just as an example, and entering those into various tools. And you might have to enter those into 5 or 6 different network tools. And it's very common that there's errors in the way that humans enter that data. So IP addresses not entered incorrectly or domains not entered incorrectly in a block. Well, that can result in the traffic getting through, and that in turn will minimize your security posture and increase your risk. Moving on to the next slide. So the next problem I saw was implementing smarter incident response, right? So cyber IR is one of the most critical capabilities to any organization. Most organizations leverage contractors to perform these cyber roles. And that's not a bad thing, but there's definitely challenges as how cyber contracts are written and how they're implemented. So most of these cyber contracts have some type of service level agreement, right? So the SLA is a way for the government to really measure how effective the contractor is in their performance. But the tricky part is with cyber SLAs, it's very hard to implement an SLA that says, hey, you are very good at performing IR and you're very good at responding to these various cyber threats, and I can show, and we have this to show for that, right? A lot of the times the way these are written is something that's more tangible, right? So think about a time-based SLA. So a lot of IR starts with looking at cyber dashboards and ticketing them and then responding to those tickets. Well, if you have a 20-minute SLA for anything that comes across a cyber dashboard, this can this can a lot of times lead to analysts being more focused on ticketing versus responding, and that's a real critical problem, right? So the contractor knows how they're being measured or how they're being graded, so they emphasize the importance of ticketing these things and meeting the SLAs. But as a manager of the SOC, I don't want my analysts to be focused on maybe a user going to a blocked site the same way that they would respond to maybe a server respond or pinging or making calls out to a foreign nation. That to me is a lot higher critical incident that requires a lot more attention, that requires quicker attention. But when you do have time-based SLAs, everything kind of goes into one big pot. It gets ticketed, and then it gets escalated to whoever it may be in a various time frame, and you never know what's being responded to more critically than others. And then even after that happens, after the ticket is created, the dashboards are SLAs are met, the analyst has to actually execute an IR plan if it's a cyber incident or event. We can go on to the next slide. So here's a sample IR plan, and this kind of dovetails on what the problem number one was with repetitive tasks. So you can see here, an IR plan essentially is a SOP or a run book. And you can see here, I have 9 different steps. So you may have to contact your first line supervisor. You may have to report it to an outside entity like DHS, US CERT in civilian realm. You may have to pull pertinent information from the alert that you got on the dashboard. You then have to place the necessary blocks in the tools. You may have to contact the cyber engineering teams in case a policy change or something like that is required. Then you have to conduct a cyber investigation, right? You have to take the data from different tools and sources and then correlate that data to make sense of it, and then really decide what the next steps are and if it is an actual cyber incident. You may have to update management on a regular time frame, right, to ensure that they know what the latest is with the event that you are responding to. And you may have to maintain an IR timeline and generate an after action report. As you can see here, a lot of these things can be automated. It's not necessarily highly skilled work. It's a lot of tedious work, but it's necessary. These are all things that have to happen in an IR situation. You have to be meeting certain requirements. You have to be communicating in a certain way and make sure that your stakeholders know. But as a manager, I want my cyber analyst to really be focused on conducting the investigation. Maybe pulling the information from the alert or placing the blocks is something that you think an analyst would do, but that's all stuff that could be automated, right? Really investigating the human aspect of IR is what I want them to be focused on. Next slide. So I said the robots can automate many of the tasks within the IR plan. I think really 8 out of the 9 of those things can be automated. One thing what's really important to highlight here is how more efficient a robot will be in these IRs. So again, executing an IR plan and all those tasks, it takes hours and maybe even days to complete a full investigation. Robots can complete a lot of these tasks instantly. Any stakeholders would receive information in almost real time. Your blocks would be put in almost real time. And they could respond faster, right? So the faster you do respond, the more efficient your IR processes are, the better your risk posture is, and the better you are from just a cyber perspective as an organization. I think on a quarterly basis, we would have to report on our FISMA metrics, our time to closure. So this is information that's being reported up to basically the director level of how quickly you are responding to incidents. So UiPath could make a very critical improvement in these capabilities and really shrink your time to closure for a lot of your cyber-related tickets. And then lastly, UiPath allows analysts to do analyst work, and I think that's the most important thing that I want to hammer home, right? UiPath is it's a very specialized tool, right? You can use it in different ways. You can have a robot that an analyst can use, an attended or unattended robot that analysts can use, and they will be able to perform these tasks in a much more efficient way, and they'll be able to really sharpen their skills as analysts. Next slide. So the last problem I want to highlight here is ensuring cyber tool functionality. So cyber tool is critical to an organization, and I experienced this firsthand, right? So most people associate OPM with the breach, and it's fair. It's probably one of the biggest cyber incidents that's ever occurred, right? And so after the breach, we were tasked with implementing a lot of tools. In a very short time frame, we implemented a lot of different tools. So, so the tool functionality is important from a lot of different levels. So not just from a confidentiality or integrity of data perspective, but also from an availability perspective. And when you implement a lot of different cyber tools that are touching users and applications, you have the ability to cause disruptions. And that's what happened. It seemed like almost every week we were participating in what we called cyber 911 calls, where you'd have basically all your IT-related staff on a phone call trying to figure out what was causing the disruption. And a lot of times it was our security tools, because there were new tools. We didn't know how they played with everything when you're trying to get everything implemented in a really quick time frame. And so we caused outages to things like web applications that were external facing, right? Our customer facing. Email, knocking email off can cause huge disruptions. Remote access, things that were very highly visible to the CIO, to our CISO, to the application owners, to the director, right? So I got a lot of heat for that because our tools are causing this, but also from I got a heat from availability perspective, but just from a cyber perspective, if your firewalls or your web or email filters aren't working correctly, you could be letting bad stuff in or bad actors in and really maximizing risk to your organization. So really having your tools function properly is critical. Next step, or next slide. So what we did was we needed a way to ensure cyber tool functionality. And what we did was we went to all our technology vendors and we compiled a list of best practices. And this entailed check for any alerts on the tools, check for critical services that are running on the tools, check for potential storage issues, ensure that policies are being applied correctly on all the tools. And so what we did was we'd have 5 junior level engineers that would wake up at 6 in the morning every day, log in from wherever they were, and they would log into all of our different tools and perform a health check on every single tool, every component of those tools, and then compile it into a report, and then email that out to all of the various managers or stakeholders if they needed to before 7 in the morning. So you can imagine that, so that's 5 engineers, an hour a day, just 25 hours, more than 50% of one of those engineers' FTEs per week, right? And not to mention these, even though they're junior engineers, they're junior cyber engineers, so they're very expensive hourly rates. And those hours can be utilized on something that's much more critical or much more important to me as a manager. Next slide. So UiPath can definitely do all of the things that they were doing in those health checks, right? It can log into your various tools. It can check for defined health parameters. It can ensure that your policies are being applied. I've talked to some people about how we've accidentally turned off spam filtering for an entire weekend. UiPath could have been used to actually check that policy was in place, that critical policy was in place. That one caused a lot of embarrassment for us. We had to tell the CISO and the CIO that we accidentally turned off spam filtering for an organization for an entire weekend. That didn't go over too well, but UiPath could have definitely helped in that scenario where we could have checked those policies and ensured that thing was never turned off by accident. And in general, it can do it in a fraction of the time, right? So it took our 5 different engineers utilizing time, whereas robots could do this in a fraction of the time, and I could use those FTEs in a much better way. And in closing, I just want to say that brings me to the end of kind of where I saw very immediate usage for UiPath, but I think I want to reiterate how open UiPath is, right? Every organization is different, it has different processes, different requirements, but I can guarantee you there's an area where UiPath can be used to improve your cyber capabilities. It's just a matter of looking at how you're doing things and identifying areas where you may have some inefficiencies, areas where you think that you're spending too many cycles, areas where you believe that it's really tedious and that humans are doing these tasks, but they're not really human necessary tasks, right? It's really just looking at your overall processes and your posture and seeing exactly those areas that you can target to really place some automation in there to improve your cyber functionality. And that brings me to the end of my portion of the presentation. So Mike, I'll kick it back to you.
Well, yeah, and just maybe recapping some of the value, I think one thing to point off is I don't think anybody wants to turn a spam filter off in an organization with thousands of people. I gotta imagine you guys got a little heat for that. So this could be a great thing to check in your tool. But as Spike had said, reduction in human error, speeding up response time, allowing your analysts to focus on analyst work. I think these are all things that can improve your cyber process. Even I'm starting to see some questions pop up. One on higher employee retention. I certainly think taking some of these mundane tasks away would help with that. You go ahead to the next slide, please. And one thing on next steps before we do kind of get into questions more, a few things, you're watching this, you want to learn more. So we tried to come up with some ideas of things you could get after and think about with this solution. One is scheduling an RPA automation health check. I think if you sit down with some UiPath certified engineers and people like Swag and define processes you can automate and reviewing some of your workflows, you'll really be surprised at how much there that can support. There's also the ability to just download a free trial. Sometimes it's nice to play with things at home. Maybe you could, once COVID ends, you could book your family a vacation with a robot, right? Or you could have it flag your email. Set up a proof of value. There's tons of training available. UiPath hosts the RPA Academy, and there's tons of free training available especially if you do just try this at home, or if you move forward with it with your organization. It's nice that is available. And August Shell also put a UiPath starter kit into a bundle on SOUP, on our NASA SOUP contract. It includes a UiPath attended name user bot, a UiPath RPA developer bot, 8 hours of engineering support. So kind of something to get you started and get working. But with that, we can go ahead and hit the next slide and we can open it up for questions.
Hey, as Amy's getting the questions ready, Swaggart, let me ask you a quick question about SOAR, right? Security orchestration, automation, and response. That seems to be either a competitor to RPA or can actually be augmented and amplified because of RPA. What are your thoughts around SOAR?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because I feel like SOAR is a hot topic and everybody wants to have SOAR. But one of the most critical things, in my opinion, to understand is SOAR is great, right? So automating your security response is, I think, something that's critical to any organization. But you do have to achieve some level of maturity to do that, right? You have to have really established tools, processes within those tools to make your SOAR effective. When I think of RPA, I think of it as a much more holistic approach, right? So RPA can definitely be integrated into SOAR, right? You can use RPA to kind of kick off how your SOAR works. But I think more importantly, RPA is a much more efficient tool with arming your staff. So making your staff much better. A lot of people are never going to be removed, right? We're not going to fully be an automated organization ever. There always are going to be analysts. There always are going to be engineers. RPA is always going to be able to help those people do their jobs better. where SOAR isn't going to reach everything. SOAR has a boundary to where it's going to reach, and that's your security, orchestration, and automation. RPA reaches outside that. It can function inside and outside that, so it kind of spans that boundary.
Thank you, Swagat. This is Amy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we have some questions from the panel. So one of the young ladies said, I thought I understood it, but got lost. I'm not really understanding the why piece of it and how. What if we are tracking these already through other means like API or on the SIM?
So yeah, I have a question about, so I thought I understood, but I'm seeing a question. So which piece are they tracking through means of an API or a SIM?
I guess, Swagat, can you please unmute Rini?
Hang on just a moment, looking for her now.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Hey, how's it
Other
going?
than that, I can answer the one from Julie on sharing the deck because it's simple. Yes, we do plan to share it.
All right, Rini, the floor is yours again.
Yeah, my question was around, so if we're tracking some of the alerts, like if someone turns off something, you know, that's an alert that we created in our SIM tool, how would this mitigate that, or how is that different if we're pulling alerts from other tools into our SIM and viewing them there?
Yeah, no, I don't think the idea was to really replace that. If you're using that tool to do that, then great. If that's working for you, I think that it just is a use case. I don't think that a lot of organizations are mature enough to be doing that, and this really could help an organization that doesn't have that capability already in place. I think that's more of the perspective that I was coming from, and we didn't have those things already set up in across the board. I mean, we weren't just checking for certain policies being up, but we were checking for multiple different things across a lot of different tools, and we had engineers doing it. So in that case, I think it's very helpful to have a tool like UiPath that you could use attendant to say, go check this thing and go and feed it to this, and then kick off a report to these various people or these various stakeholders. And that's the use case that we're trying to highlight.
Hey, and Swagat, while Rennie has the floor, he did ask a follow-up question. Is there going to be a demo? Because that might help prospects wrap their minds around just the power of UiPath.
Yeah, I think that I think there are certain demos. I was speaking more from a high level. I don't know if demos have been built for the use cases that I was speaking to, but there are definitely cyber demos that have been built for other use cases, which can definitely be shared.
Hey, Swagger, I'm going to ask you to look at Doug Middleton's question. I'm going to answer Michael Goddard's real quick, and then if you could answer his, because I think the human side of robotics is important. Michael, you asked about have you done any thorough ROI analysis or any ROI tools available? So I would tell you that the ROI analysis that has been done by these 79 agencies, there are probably 25 or 30 articles out in GovLoop, GovExec, FedScoop, and other magazines where agencies have been interviewed and they have put out their return on investment. And all of them right now, I will tell you, are reporting that they're seeing their money from their initial investment back in the first 6 to 8 months. But agencies like the Army Air Force Exchange Service that set out to, with a very small initial purchase to save 1.4 million and saved 8 million by the 6-month mark will really tell you about ROI. And again, ROI is measured and also in extra capacity at a shared services center. It's managed by a CFO from the ability to do better audits or to do better compliance. But to answer that second part of your question, we do have a tool that automates the whole question for you on ROI. And of course, we have spreadsheets for you that you can use that build in how many people were doing this, how much time did they spend, and it will generate a ROI for you also. So the answer is yes to that. And if you work through the contact information at the end of this webinar, we will make sure that between August Shell and their staff that we get that type of information to you. And I hope that answers your question. And Swaggart, do you want to take a look at Doug's and answer that one for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. I would say absolutely turnover and attrition was, that was definitely a problem for us. A lot of times you would see that analysts were just not able to, like I said, sharpen their skills. They were, it very much entailed in how the SOPs worked. And a lot of times these analysts are there for, we had a 24/7 SOC, right? So they're working 10-hour, 12-hour shifts a lot of the times. And so, yeah, you can imagine just following SOPs, ticketing, dashboards, looking at dashboards and ticketing for 12 hours, how that could lead to a environment where it wasn't so pleasant. You got burned out very quickly, and you weren't really doing the fun side of things, right? The fun cyber stuff. You were really tied up in creating reports, making sure that emails went out, executing IR plans, things of that nature, where they really probably signed up to do more analyst type work. And so, yeah, we did see a lot of attrition in that area.
Hey, Swaggart, we do have a follow-up from Julie, and she's wondering if you have any lessons learned or failure stories that you can share.
So unfortunately I didn't get to implement UiPath at OPM, so I probably would have had more lessons learned or failure stories to respond to if I had implemented it there. But I will say this, there's always a challenge in getting things implemented, but the thing you have to look at kind of the ROI and where you can improve process. I can say that there's a lot of pain points with the way that we were doing things. It took a lot of, we were very new SOC, had very new tools, had very new people. So we were kind of learning on the fly, and having UiPath in place, having something that we could have armed our staff with to make their jobs easier, make them do their jobs better, that would have definitely created a better environment. I think reiterating what the previous question, we could have held more staff, and overall it would have been a more pleasant experience if you're able to kind of eliminate the tedious things that people are doing and have them focused on more critical areas.
And Julie, one way to think about this is the bad guys, whether they're private individuals that are teaming together or if they're nation state bad actors, they're unleashing bots by the hundreds and thousands on the federal network every day, trying to bang in and get into the federal network. And when you heard Swaggart talking, there's a small finite group of analysts sitting in every security operations center that are expected to react to everything. And as a result, it's got to be hair on fire all day long. And so you could walk in and say, you need to buy yourself some great big new system and rip out what you have. And during that period when you're doing all of that, there's chaos and more confusion. Or you can layer a bot on top of that, a robot, right? The good bot, if you will, and have it mimic and replicate what you already do. When an agent sees an alert on any one of your existing systems and does 7 steps right behind it, as Swaggart suggested in the SOP, if you had the bot doing that for you, you wouldn't lose the investment and the historical knowledge that you have from the software and the other equipment that you already have in place. And so the lesson learned might be is don't do what we always have done in the past, which is rip out and replace, but simply augment what you currently have to free up all the people so that they're in a better position. The perfect example for me is always a term paper. no matter when I turned it in, there was always the word form when I meant from, because you get so busy with the bigness. Let the bots do all that minor, repetitive, tedious, mundane work so that the staff there can focus on the actual penetration that's trying to be made and how to block that and respond to it.
Awesome, Jim. I think we do have 2 more questions. This one might be relevant to you specifically, Jim. Have you done any thorough ROI analysis, or are there any ROI tools available from UiPath to help justify the investment?
There sure are. And so we're happy to give those to you. We have a tool that you can use right away, a little spreadsheet that will knock it out for you. And for those of you that are really going into the RPA program, you want to look at our automation hub, because that automates the entire design, develop, and ideation process, a part of which is to capture ROI.
Wonderful. And the last question, which I guess is more of a statement, it's just correlating UiPath and automating penetration testing. And knowing Swagat's background, maybe he can elaborate just a little bit more before we sign off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you could definitely use a robot to automate a lot of your penetration testing. Again, the great thing about UiPath is it's an open canvas, right? If you basically tell it what to do, and it'll do it. It'll either do it at the click of your button in what is an attended bot, or an unattended bot, which is kind of sitting in the background and executing what you want it to execute. So I could definitely say, go out here, take this piece of code, execute it on my network, execute it against this target, and then feed this information over here, generate a report. It can basically do from basically the inception of the test down to generating a report and telling you where your weaknesses are, what the behavior was. So yeah, that can all be facilitated through UiPath.
Awesome. We have one last question. Can UiPath Automation Hub be deployed in a medium or high FedRAMP environment?
Yes. So we actually have UiPath running on the high side in an organization now, and it certainly can be deployed on a FedRAMP environment. Now, I'll be very clear. UiPath nor any other RPA vendor today is FedRAMP certified. But in order to run on a FedRAMP environment, we do have the security for that.
Wonderful. I think that about wraps it up. I just want to reiterate that there's contact information on the last slide on the screen share. We know that questions might be formulated once you have time to process the resources that we send, so please feel free to reach out. My contact information is on the screen, and I'll be happy to connect you with whomever the proper resource is to aid in your evaluation of UiPath and your path forward. But aside from that, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to working with you all. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.